Welcome back to the Art Trippin lecture series. Today we are going to talk about the Renaissance in Northern Europe. So we have talked about the early Renaissance in Italy, and today I want to look at some of the artists of the North. Now, when you study Italian Renaissance art, you might be familiar with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That's right. Donatello, Leonardo, Raphael, and Michelangelo. So who are the superstar artists of Northern Europe? So today we will look at a little bit of how these artists in Northern Europe are different from the artists in Italy. And we will look specifically at three artists: Roger van der Weyden, Robert Campin, and Jan van Eyck. I'm Dr. Megan Lorraine Debin, and I'm an art historian, and this is Art Trippin Lecture Series. Hi, I'm Dr. Megan Lorraine Debin, and this is Art Trippin. So, to talk about the differences between early Italian Renaissance and the early Renaissance outside of Italy, let's look at the Flemish artist Roger van der Weyden, the Deposition from circa 1435 to 1438. This is now housed in the Prado Museum in Spain. Okay, so when we look at this image, what we see in terms of iconography may be familiar to us. We see the deposition is the removal of Jesus's dead body from the cross after the crucifixion. And so the first thing we want to do is look at this maybe side by side with an Italian depiction of the same subject matter from around the same time. So here we're looking at Fra Angelico's Descent from the Cross from the late 1430s, and we're comparing it to Roger van der Weyden's Deposition or Descent from the Cross from about 1435. Now, when we look at the Italian version, first of all, we see that this is a different medium. This is tempera instead of oil. Tempera is made by taking an egg yolk and mixing it with ground pigment. The pigment might also be suspended in a little bit of water. And then this is applied to canvas or wood or sometimes even the wall. In contrast, when we look at Roger van der Weyden's painting, we can see that this is done with oil painting. So just on first glance, you can see that with oil paint, artists are able to get really rich, deep, saturated, and bold colors. And you just can't get that same depth and that same saturation with tempera that you can get with oil painting. So this is one of the big innovations of the Northern artists, is that the Northern artists have mastered oil painting before the Italians. So when we look at these two, we see the same iconography, the same subject matter, but we start to see some stylistic differences. When we look at the Italian version, we can see that this is somewhat idealized. The figures are very sort of stoic and somewhat peaceful, and we see this kind of idealized Italian landscape behind the figures. Then when we look at Roger van der Weyden's painting, we can see that the figures are crowded into a very narrow, tight space. And you see an unusual shape of the canvas, and that's because this is an altarpiece, and this was originally intended for a church, and so the painting would have had to fit into this carved out niche. So there would have been other images above this painting. So these figures are crowded into this interior space. So when we look at Northern Renaissance art, we're going to see a lot more of domestic and interior scenes compared to the Italians, who are often using landscapes in their background. You will also see a great deal of emotion expressed in this Roger van der Weyden painting. We have Mary dressed in blue, the mother of Jesus, who has fainted at the sight of her son's dead body. And she's sort of leaning over to the side, and the flow of her body is echoed in this kind of S-curve flow of the body of Jesus that hangs limp Sort of his head is hanging, his arms are hanging. There is a sense of weightiness to this figure. You can see the bearded man behind Jesus sort of holding him up by his armpits. So there's a sense of weightiness to the figures in this Roger van der Weyden. We also see, look at the figure in the back, this female figure with the white veil, perhaps Mary Magdalene, who is weeping and has her head in her hands. And again, we see this real depiction of emotion. So we start to see more emotionality in these Northern Renaissance paintings. We also see that overall the composition is sort of visually complex. We have these flowing forms that kind of create these diagonals that create a sense of movement, as opposed to the Italian version of this that looks more sort of, the figures are almost more pillar or column-like, that there's this sense of vertical lines and a kind of static feeling to the Fra Angelico, whereas with the Roger van der Weyden, we have this sense of movement, drama, the despair, the pathos, the emotions are really coming out in these bodies that twist and convulse and cringe and weep and faint. So we have a great deal of difference in terms of the overall feeling of the painting. We will also notice with Northern Renaissance artists that because they are using oil paint, they are really able to get into the details of different textures of fabric, of different textures of wood and metal. In the next video, I'll show you another example of a painting from an artist working outside of Italy in the north of Europe. And when we say the north of Europe, we mean sort of modern day Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, this kind of region, France, anywhere sort of outside of Italy kind of falls under this umbrella term when we're talking about the early Renaissance. In another video, we'll look at Robert Campion's painting close up and we'll identify some of those details of texture, of the highlights of the metal and the different fabric. To look at this comparison more closely, let's look at two more paintings. Here you have on your screen Hugo van der Goes's Portinari altarpiece, where we see a depiction of Mary in this blue dress, the mother of Jesus, and she is sort of observing little baby Jesus who is down on the ground, and she is surrounded by angels, saints, and of course these kind of shepherds or peasants who have come to pay their respects to this newborn baby Jesus. And next to this we have a painting of similar subject matter, same subject matter, the Adoration of the Shepherds, and this is by Ghirlandaio. This is from 1485. So again, we have a Northern Renaissance artist and an Italian Renaissance artist from around the same time period, 1470s, 1480s. So when you look at the Italian piece, you can see that overall it's a very idealized, very beautiful, very serene kind of image. You can also see that the animals appear to be sort of leaning over this trough that looks like a Roman sarcophagus. You also see pillars and a Roman arch in the background. So the landscape gives us this very Italian Roman feel. And then look at the figures themselves. They're very idealized. If you look at a close-up of the shepherds, these are like really hot silver foxes, like kind of like the George Clooney of Renaissance paintings. These guys are working in the fields. They are shepherds, but they are glistening. Their hair's perfectly coiffed. Like they really are idealized and beautiful looking. Whereas when you look at Hugo van der Goes's artwork, you can see in the background, we don't see any of those kind of Roman or Italian looking architectural features. Instead, we see kind of Northern architecture. We also can see that the baby Jesus is a little bit sort of smaller, kind of reminds us of that medieval shrunken old man baby Jesus. And then let's look closely at the Portinari altarpieces shepherds. When you look at the northern shepherds, first of all, you can see a kind of more northern landscape in the background. And these look like guys who work in the fields. They have dirty fingernails, scruffy beards, torn clothing. Like this is a much more honest and authentic depiction of what a shepherd might look like. So one difference that you'll see between Italian Renaissance and Northern Renaissance is that the Italians kind of put a nice shiny filter on everything. Everything is glowing and beautiful. And the Northern artists might be a little more authentic, realistic with their depictions. There is no filter, there is no Facetune. These are real working people with the dirty fingernails to prove it. So here we can see this difference between the idealized, beautiful Italian style and the more honest, authentic depictions of the Northern Renaissance. So hopefully this helps you understand the difference between Italian Renaissance and Northern Renaissance. And here we're really talking about the 15th century or the 1400s. In another video, we'll talk about some of these differences once we get to the High Renaissance or the 1500s. Stay tuned for the next video when we will discuss Robert Campion's Annunciation, where we will see that Northern Renaissance interest in depicting the different textures and surface materials. If you like this video, like and subscribe, comment below, let me know if you have any questions, and stay tuned for more Art Trippin lecture series.